Well, good evening, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the build environment. And I've been looking at knowledge management in the built environment for quite a few years now. And these are some of the topics we'll talk about. So, building information strategy, we'll kind of have a look at the hierarchy and kind of how information is collected as construction develops and designs and handover. Then we'll have a brief look at standards and how they're currently issued and worked with. So I've just made a quick video that will kind of talk us through just the whole complexity of information that is used during the design and construction. So the first bit talks about the BIM strategy, which has the standards, technology, stages, and people. Then we move on to enabling tools. So file sharing, for example, electronic document management systems, authoring tools, model viewers, and so forth and so on. The next bit will be the resources, for example, books, social media, blogs, and different technical documents that are associated with design or construction or the management of buildings. The next is collaboration, process, and information. This covers the processes that are undertaken during the build and the design of buildings. So you've got the standardization, interoperability, maybe even a BIM execution plan that sets out how information is organized and exchanged during design and construction and handed over to the client. And one thing that's come out of BIM is a common data environment. Then we start to look at technology, which is primarily using software and hardware. So this is where our BIM common data environment software, architectural, sustainability, and so forth and so on arrives, and we use it day in, day out. The next bit is our standards. This is a very big part of the knowledge management that's used in construction. So we've got the guidance documents that are produced by Ministry of Housing, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later, by ISO, by the British Standards, Ministry of Housing, and so forth and so on. The most important bit is the people that are involved in bringing this information together. These include the architects, engineers, clients, and there's just such big teams that are involved in the collaboration of designing and constructing buildings. It takes a lot of coordination, and bringing all this information together takes a lot of work. And technology, it has been talked about for the last couple of years since the construction industry has issued a BIM strategy to reduce costs and efficiencies. But the challenge is technology isn't going to fix all this. So here we just have a quick look at the approved document B. So this one covers fire safety. The government's currently issuing these in a PDF format. which is very difficult to search through and collect. So what I've done is, as a prototype, is started to organize these into paragraphs. And this search is for diagram 15.1, and it covers firefighting lifts. But as you can see, the red rectangles represent, see diagram 15.1. So click on that. And then that relates down to paragraph 15.8, which is access to buildings and firefighting personnel and flats. And then you need to look in another paragraph in 15.9. Well, 15.8 and 15.9 are probably on the same page. So then if we, okay, so we need to look at diagram 15.2. Well, that potentially could be on a different page. Well, flipping back from page to page on a document's not too difficult, even in a PDF or a hard copy if you use it all the time. But one of the challenges is if this says in accordance with section 6 of BS 999, so then you need to have the British Standard, which is Fire Safety and Design Management and the Use of Buildings Code of Practice. Also, it talks about looking at table C1. Then C1 relates to another British standard. So it's all quite a bit of a challenge at the moment to be able to bring this information together and all this knowledge that architects and fire engineers and even project managers on site need to know, especially when it comes to fire safety. My last slide is about interoperability. And in the past, we have lots of different systems that don't talk to each other. But recently, Designing Buildings Wiki has built a tool where you can overlay a definition on top of a word. For example, I've highlighted means of escape, and then it's given me the definition and some context towards that. And this is very helpful, and more tools that are developed that can work with each other makes life much easier when you're trying to look at lots of different information and knowledge that's stored in lots of different systems. So I've just put a couple references. If you want to explore the graph a little bit more, it's here. And for the approved document B, you can go to ePrints. And for that, and if you wanted to add it to Firefox, if you're in the construction industry, you can go to this link. And in the graph, I've referenced some of the NBS periodic table of BIM. The last reference is a very interesting report that came out in November of last year, which talks about making information into chunks. And this one in particular talks about using linked data, but I won't get into linked data at the moment. But if you want information to be absorbed, it talks a lot about using phrases and getting information so it can be read by a computer and also with humans at the same time. And that's about it for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. I think that was a very interesting, nicely illustrated talk. Do we have any questions?
How do these systems integrate with sort of digital preservation systems or other systems to archive the outputs of these building information systems? I imagine for people working in built heritage in 70, 80 years' time, having access to the original digital documents in a preserved form would be something that's really useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is quite a bit of work done around trying to preserve architectural old buildings. the challenge is, I mean, that's come out in the last couple of years, is new buildings that we've built in the last 10, 50 years, what have you. All that information's gone over to the client, or it's gone over to the managing agent, or it's gone over here or there, and it hasn't been preserved very well. And that's kind of the main focus, or one of the focuses of a building information model, is that you would have a common data environment where you'd be able to collect all this information. So you'd be able to collect the designs, you'd be able to collect the specification, the cost, and just so forth and so on, and be able to bring it all into one. So you could hand it over and preserve it long term. And as you know, in London and across the country right now, they're taking a lot of buildings and they're looking at them. They're cutting holes in the wall to investigate what's there, because they don't have that information. And that's why coming up with some very simple processes is important.
I think there was some interesting work going on at City University of London, which is looking at buildings as documents. I don't know if my colleague Debbie Lee might know more about that, but there was somebody doing a PhD in that area.
Yes, Oz, hello everyone. Oz Ablett, I think I've said that right. He must be a second year PhD student now. He's looking at this, and I have literally just written a note to myself saying, if this presentation is available, make sure I email him to tell him. I was just thinking of him as he was doing it. I think he'd find your work really interesting, Phil. I don't know, but I mean, I do. But yeah, conversations with him suggest that there's a lot of work to be done in this area as well. So there could be an interesting link there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that the challenge is that there's quite a bit of information, as you can see very briefly, of all those different systems that are trying to come together. And then either you're a building owner or you're a project manager, and you're trying to put all that together and make sense of it and comply with the building regs.
It sounds fascinating and very difficult, and I'm glad my PhD wasn't on it.
Also, Martin White has posted a question. If you'd like to ask Martin.
Bim, what is your assessment of the methodologies for quality management of ISO 9001? Cover some or all of these requirements. Well, the challenge with ISO 9001, as far as I know, it works a lot on manufacturing. And I mean, at my business, we use ISO 9001 as far as our certification. But as far as the systems that are out there, so the ISO that we have certification for at work is for our internal systems, so how we manage client information, how we manage sales, how we manage the build process. But the building information model, there's a lot of different systems, as I tried to demonstrate there, that currently aren't covered by ISO, but the ISO 9001. But there are some other ISOs that are out there that are being used or being developed, or they're still emerging, and it's quite a long process. The UK started their BIM journey in 2011, and it's still a work in progress. I hope that answers your question, Martin.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Yeah, so one of the things I was looking at you, Andy, by the way, from City, another person from City, when you were displaying that interface with that interaction from a search and people going off in different directions, I realised that's actually an extremely complex interaction, and designing an interface for that is really quite a challenge. I just wonder, how on earth do you organise an interface so that basically the potential for information overload is enormous. So keeping them in actually on what they need to know is actually quite difficult. Can you give us some idea of how you might go about doing that?
Well, if I could just go back to share my screen for a second. So my idea, hopefully everybody can see my screen there.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. There's universities are using a system called ePrints, and it's a document repository for journals. I'm sure people at City, I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yes.
So I've used this in the past for my dissertation that I did on linked data, and the last couple of months I've been putting approved document B into this repository. And instead of having lots of articles there, right now I've broken it up into individual paragraphs. So this little paragraph, 15, that's an individual item in ePrints. And so bringing in, oops, sorry. Obviously I don't use animation that much, but bringing in the British standards into those is a bit of a challenge because there's a paywall there. So for argument's sake, the BS 999 is over £200. So how do you have that relevant? How do I know how to, in accordance with Section 6? Well, what is Section 6? So that's kind of a big challenge, but I think you've got to start somewhere, and approved documents are kind of the go-to document that the construction industry uses to comply with building regulations. So I think, to answer your question, sorry, is get it into chunks so it can be absorbed. And the reason I put it into ePrints too is that you can build yourself a list of these different chunks. So it could work with any kind of knowledge, really.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got complex knowledge that's coming from lots of different places, well, maybe break it up into chunks instead of having pages and pages of reports that you're trying to absorb and put together. But it's kind of getting the machines to do a lot of that work for us. I'm not there yet.
I can see a combination of getting an HCI researcher involved to look at the interactions and how things can be organised, but also machine learning, information extraction, you know, entities and things like that. You know, the elements that a civil engineer will be particularly interested in, or a fire safety engineer, whatever is appropriate for them. No,
well, I mean, that's kind of the next step, is that that reference that I put back in there is AI,
right.
but it's using Sparkle and, you know, using an ontology to organize those phrases and questions. But if I kept going down that modeling route, I'd have nothing to show anybody, because that will take a long time to develop and get correct and model. And so I thought I'd start somewhere.
But you could build a classifier, couldn't you? Is that what you're talking about, Andy?
Potentially, yes, you could do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, are there any other questions? I'd like to continue the discussion, but I'm also aware that time is moving on and we'll have a chance afterwards. So if there are no more